Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Building and Fire Board of Appeals General Meeting. May I have the roll call, please?
Roll call. Chair Kashishian,
Yes.
Vice Chair Tatulian, Board Member Lee,
Yes.
Board Member Aharonian, Board Member Hanessian. Board Member Hanessian?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 2.
Yes, please.
Report regarding posting of agenda. The agenda for the Building and Fire Board of Appeals meeting will be posted Friday, July 16th, 2021 on the bulletin board outside City Hall and on the city's website.
Thank you. Number 3.
Presentations and commendations. Building and safety updates. We have the building official, Miro Latsky.
Thank you. Good afternoon, honorable board members and staff. I have 3 updates since our last meeting held in 2019. The first, the most current Glendale Building and Safety Code of the 2020 edition has been adopted by the City Council and has been in effect since January 1st, 2020. The document is based on the 2019 California Building Codes. The second, this pandemic has been a strain on us all in building and safety, including city departments associated with the Permit Services Center. Though we closed the doors to public and sent staff to work at home, we did not close to service to the public. Building and safety, planning, fire department, public works, GWP, neighborhood services, arborists, and all other departments and divisions have been working together in this virtual manner. In so doing, we developed the virtual submittal portal for customers so that we could allow digital submittals as a means to continue serving customers. Invoicing and payments were revamped to process tasks completely by remote. We have developed a virtual method of plan review and approval. We thank ISD department in assisting us in creating these virtual tools. All of this was done on the fly, building a ship as we float down the river. As of beginning June, staff is now back in their city offices. Last week, we finally opened to the public, free-flowing, but closed a few hours later upon the last-minute recommendations by the county, and so continue to accept appointments continue to serve customers by appointment only. We continue to expand this appointment system to greater volume. New portals of appointment generations have been developed by planning divisions. We continue to move forward at the direction of Los Angeles County Health, the City Manager's Office, and the City Council. The third item, the city has purchased through ISD's effort a new land management system to replace the old outdated CSI system. A dedicated group of city staff from all departments are working together with the vendors to format the system appropriate to our specific needs as we serve the public. Not only will this automatically track and coordinate all activities for building and safety, planning, fire, GWP, water, electric, public works, etc., all the other departments and divisions that are associated with the Permit Services Center, but also this system supports comprehensive digital submission and issuance modules for permits, digital plan review, record keeping, and even virtual inspection capabilities. We expect the Tyler Gov system to be implemented in approximately 15 months. In closing, I would like to thank the City of Glendale for the opportunity to serve in this capacity, and now turn this back over to Joseph. Thank you.
Thank you for that report. I have a question. Does the city currently have electronic plan review?
We have a informal where staff have come together and individually to utilize their tools in order to be able to plan check at home. Some have been using the old-fashioned paper methods by picking up and dropping off, and many have picked up and utilized various apps to do digital review. We've developed signature means of signature for approvals. with the assistance of ISD and other staff. And so we have a makeshift version of a digital plan review system, you might say.
Well, thank you. We appreciate the work of staff making that happen. Thank you. Great accomplishment.
Thank you.
Item number 4, please.
If we go back to 3B.
Oh, I'm sorry, 3B.
Fire prevention updates. I have the Fire Marshal Ragusa is not available, but we do have our Assisted Fire Marshal Foster McLean.
Yes, thank you. The fire department has no updates at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's move on, please.
The approval of the minutes. Minutes of the Building and Fire Board of Appeals meeting of October 16, 2019.
May I have a motion to approve the meetings of the Board of Appeals meeting of October 16, please?
I make the motion.
Motion, roll call. Chair Kashishian.
Yes?
Board Member Lee.
Yes.
Board Member Hanessian.
yes,
Oral communications.
Perfect. Item 5, oral communications. Discussion is limited to items not a part of this agenda. Each speaker is limited to 5 minutes. The Building and Fire Board of Appeals Commission may question or respond to the speaker, but there will be no debate or discussion. Let me just take a look. At this time, we have no callers.
Thank you. Next item, please.
Item 6, old business. There is none at this time.
Okay. Next item.
Item 7, agenda item 7, new business. Item appeal, 2253 Hollister Terrace, in relation to BIT 2016405. Project description, public appeal to Building and Fire Board of Appeals regarding Public Works decision on indigenous tree permit, BITO 2016405. Today we have present applicant Michael Barclay and staff member Catherine Williams from Public Works. First up will be Miss Williams from Public Works.
Hi, can you hear me? I'm Catherine Williams. I'm the arborist technician in the forestry section of Public Works. It's my role to administer the indigenous tree ordinance, and this is a case I worked on directly. First of all, I want to thank Mr. and Mrs. Barkley for their ongoing cooperation, patience, and compliance with this process. I truly appreciate it, and I know it's been a long road. So thank you again for following all the steps in the appeal and permit request. This first came to my attention in, let's see, June 2020, when their tree service was doing work on their property. We had issued a permit for other trees on the property, and the request was made to cut back a limb that was overhanging into their yard from their neighbor's tree. And this is where, in the indigenous tree ordinance, we request that for all pruning that requires a permit, meaning all pruning that's over 2 inches in limb diameter and is not hazardous and is not dead wood, for instance, have the written approval of the tree owner on the permit request. That's a standard protocol that we follow for all permit requests of neighboring trees. And so while the Public Works Department does not have an issue with the request itself to make the pruning cut, we respectfully ask that the applicant secures the permission and the written approval of the tree owner, and then resubmit the permit with that information. So I'm happy to take any questions or go over any parts of the report at this time.
Not at this time.
over how many inch can cut? How many inch then cut over?
The permit request was to cut a limb diameter of approximately 12 inches. The actual ordinance requires a permit for any trimming of live branches over 2 inches. So as you can see, that's a large difference between even what we require in general.
Then before less than 2-inch diameter, we don't have a permit. We don't.
I think I understand that that's correct, that if you are only trimming branches that are 2 inches or less in diameter, even if they are on from your neighbor's tree or hanging over your property, in those cases, you do not need to file a permit application with the city. So that's where we're able to split the difference, for instance, and say, if you are trimming or you have an issue with a neighboring tree, if you're making those small cuts, or if, for instance, the limbs are dead, and any size dead wood, or are hazardous, that does not require a permit from the city, and in that case, we do not get involved. Once it becomes of a larger size, then we consider that a private matter between the tree owner and the applicant to resolve before they bring the request to the city.
Thank you very much.
My
Yes.
only question is, if they do this cut, will it affect the tree?
That's an excellent question. You know, from my review, again, I did not see an issue necessarily with the cut, and it's something I would permit if the tree owner made that request. However, what we want to make clear is that there are many impacts to trees that we cannot predict, and that even cutting a limb like that could actually expose this older tree to decay, to disease, to decline, and that's why it's essential that the tree owner is the manager and property owner of the living organism, which is the tree, is really in charge of making those decisions about the care and health when it becomes at that level of cut.
Because I noticed on the main trunk that there's been a couple of cuts already, and the tree still seems to be in good health. So
That's true. You know, trees can live quite a long time, and of course, they all show a history of pruning. What happens, you know, in a tree is that if they experience damage or a cut, the way they protect themselves is called the compartmentalization of decay. So that's why we're always looking for wounds to essentially heal over and show good callus tissue, show signs that they've blocked off any invasive pathogens, and that's what we're expecting to see. So as a tree ages, gets older, it becomes less and less able to do that simple task.
Any other questions at this time? Okay.
If there's no further questions, I would ask that Mr. Michael Barkley feel free to present. Mr. Barkley, I must add, I can bring up the screenshots or pictures or anything that you'd like. If you would just kind of walk me through that as you give your presentation, I'd be happy to do that for you.
Thank you. You ready?
Yep, absolutely. Let's get.
Good afternoon. We are Mike and Peggy Barkley. We live at 2253 Hollister Terrace in the Glen Oaks Canyon. As you know from the file, we are appealing the city's denial of our application for a permit to prune back a large limb from a neighbor's oak tree that extends onto our property. We think the material in the package clearly describes the situation and the basis for this appeal, so we'll just take a couple of minutes to summarize the basics. Several large limbs on our neighbor's oak tree encroach over and several feet past the fence between our properties. The lowest of those limbs is about 5.5 feet off the ground currently. It's dropped about a foot, I think, in the last year. It covers a portion of the area and significantly limits how we can use that portion of our property. We'd like to prune back that single limb to the fence line. Because it's an oak, the ordinance, as you know, requires a permit review by the owner. However, our neighbor has refused to approve the permit that we have prepared for him. As a result, we applied for a permit as a negatively impacted adjacent property owner. Our application asks only that we be allowed to prune the lowest encroaching limb. It would be done by a qualified tree service at our expense and would not require any entry onto our neighbor's property. We readily acknowledge that this situation is not normal, is not covered by any of the specific ordinance exemptions noted in the staff report. For example, it's neither an emergency nor a fire hazard. However, strict application of this ordinance intended to protect the city's indigenous trees is limiting our ability to improve our private property. It provides protection for the neighbor's oak tree, but in this instance is working against our rights as property owners. Each of the city's denials of our permit application has requested and suggested that the quote applicant and tree owner come to an understanding before resubmitting an application. That has not been possible. We began this quest for a permit over a year ago. The tree owner has clearly expressed his refusal to allow the pruning. That is the only reason we are here today. We are therefore asking the board to use its discretion and approve our application for a permit based on the ordinance's stated intent that the preservation of the city's indigenous trees be done in a manner that, in the words of the ordinance, respect individual rights to develop, maintain, and enjoy private property to the fullest extent consistent with the public interest, health, and welfare. We will be happy to try to answer any questions that the board may have. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to show different pictures.
Any questions from the board members?
No.
Excuse Mr. Rodarte, do you have any of the pictures that show the view from the street and a view from the hill that show
Absolutely.
the extent of the growth?
Mr.
On
Barkley,
the
just
board.
tell me when you would like me to stop. I have the photos that you submitted, and if there's just tell
Okay.
and if you'd like to go through each
Okay,
one.
this, I would want to point out one thing right here. This is, I think it may be noted in the narrative someplace else in file, but about 4 or 5 years ago, a branch broke off, and this,
In a windstorm.
in a windstorm, it's scarred, and you can see the scar here as well. It was a smaller branch, extended also over to the yard. It damaged the fence, and it's anyway just an indication that the tree survived that cut, even though it's scarred. It was not a controlled cut, as it were. It ripped off, the tree branch ripped off from the base of the trunk.
Not even the base, it's above it.
And,
Mr. Barkley, would you like me to move along?
Yes, please. That's one that extends. You can see the fence is just to the right in that picture, and you can see the asphalt sport court below that branch, and that it's pretty large. And at this point here,
Don't move it, they can see
I'm
the
sorry,
arrow.
at the lowest point, you can see a protrusion on the bottom of the limb. I measured that the other day, and it's about 5 feet 8 inches above the surface. And there are a couple of other pictures that I won't bore you with all of them, but I think it may be towards the end. That's one that again shows how far it extends over, and that arrow is where we would like to make the cut. If you go up. And that's a view from a patio above the court area, and it again shows the extent from the fence onto the court area.
Our kids used to love to play badminton there, but
The kids at one point would play badminton there, but the net finally had to come down because the shuttlecocks always wound up in the tree. So now they just use it as a huge blackboard. Okay, up. Yes, that one, that shows, yes, that's the view from the hill up above our house. And that is the view from the street. With the fence line to the left. And I think that's enough of the photos. Mr. Rodarte, thank you.
Absolutely.
Is that all?
That was the last one. And that is some of the material that was we submitted at later on. And it includes references to the, I think, no, that's Catherine, that's Ms. Williams' narrative. And I think a little further on in that document, yes, the italics is language that we pulled from a report of a certified arborist that we hired to assess the limb and the impact on the tree. She found that there is, she saw some evidence of some kind of infestation and feels that at some point the tree may fail. And that the infestation potentially could migrate to the rest of the tree.
Also reduced strength at the previous failure point.
Right, and she noted the previous failure point, the limb that fell 4 or 5 years ago. That's she thought that was significant in terms of the health of the tree and its the chances of its failure.
Yeah, she saw that this branch is twisted a bit. You can see on this photo on the right where it's narrow as a result of the prior failure of the branch.
Is there anything
Thank you.
further you would like to add?
I think we just find ourselves in a bit of a catch-22. We'd like to improve finally, after being in the house for 22 years, do something about what was, when we moved in, already an aging asphalt court. But we can't do it with the extent of the limb growth onto the property. And we can't, and again, the permit, the permission from the tree owner is required. We can't get it, so we're kind of stuck.
Okay, thank you. Any board members have questions for the applicant?
No.
Okay, I have a question, Mr. Buckley, if I may. How long have you been living in this house?
22 years.
And how long have you been facing this situation? Well, I'm trying to point to the tree, basically, the tree limb. How big was the tree limb at the time when you moved in, or how has it grown in the last 20, 25 years that you've been there?
Well, obviously in 22 years, it's grown
22 years.
significantly. The branches on that side of the lot used to be significantly higher. Again, to the kids, the grandkids and the kids would play badminton on it. Over time, the tree has grown, the branch got heavier, the branch has dropped down lower and lower. A branch adjacent to it fell like said 4 or 5 years ago. When we moved in the house, we recognized that we wanted to do some work on the sport court, but again, that was 22 years ago, and we were focused on making sure we had funds to last us for the rest of our lives. Just in the last few years, we we've always wanted to do something there. At one point, we resurfaced it with, it was a stopgap measure with asphalt coating. But the cracks still come back. You need something more significant, more significant to prevent it from coming back. We have always wanted to do something there. We finally decided a few years ago to get serious about it. And there have been a few things that have gone on distracting us from this, some larger issues in life. And then, of course, COVID didn't help. In terms, if you're getting to how long has the limb been a problem, it's grown over time. And I would say in the last probably couple of 3 years, it's gotten to the point where I would hit my head on it if I walked under it without ducking.
And did you, in the past, attempt to talk to the neighbor about cutting this tree limb at all?
We approached him last June, July or so. Initially, he said we saw him outside, and verbally he said, "Yeah, fine, no problem." A few weeks later or something, there was another email exchange, and I talked about what we wanted to do in scheduling, and he said, again, that's okay to trim the tree. And then he wanted us to wait. He took the opportunity to talk to Catherine Williams. They met. He talked to her, and then after that meeting, he emailed me indicating that while he was that he'd met with Catherine, and that he reluctantly was saying, yes, it's okay to trim the limb. Then we talked about scheduling. There was some communications back and forth. We had a permit prepared for him and submitted to him for his signature. That's all he had to do. And he had changed his mind and said, I'm not signing anything.
Okay. Well, that's just happened recently. I was referring to, let's say, 10 years ago when the tree was growing and you noticed it was becoming a problem. Did you ever talk to the neighbor about that issue, that this could be an ongoing problem later on, or a bigger problem later on?
We didn't consider it a problem at that point. Our focus was not on improving that sport court.
Okay. All right, thank you. I have a question from the staff. So, Ms. Williams, according to your report, and I understand the city ordinance that the neighbor has to apply for a permit to cut the tree because it's larger than the diameter, 2 inches, whatever it is, and you assess the situation, and were you comfortable with them cutting the tree limb? And the only reason that stopped you from issuing the permit was you needed the neighbor's agreement because the tree, they were the tree owner. Is that the correct assessment?
That's correct, because we expect that even if we permit certain work on a tree, all tree work carries some risk of damage. So essentially, the tree owner would then be responsible for the health and care of their tree, and that's why we need their approval.
So, excuse me to be so blunt, but would it be fair to say that city probably wouldn't care at this point if the owner had given permission? In other words, we didn't care whether that tree would live or not live because we're not 100% sure. As long as the owner of the tree would have given permission, the city would have issued the permit.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the first
Well,
part
I
of
want to
that.
say that there is concern about preserving the tree, or there's a concern about getting a permission from the owner to cut the tree. Which one is more important at this point?
Oh, that's a good question. So, this is under the umbrella of what we would permit, but certainly we have very strict guidelines for what we do permit because that is in the interest of preservation of the tree. So, for instance, especially in the intent of the ordinance, we want to preserve the natural canopy of the tree, the shape of the tree, and many trees do spread over multiple properties, of course. So that's why, as a general rule, we don't permit shearing a tree at the property line, and we want to see those limbs preserved, even if they are over another neighbor's yard. However, in this case, even though the tree limb doesn't show signs of significant hazard or it's not dead, this is a case where we're willing to work with two neighbors to try to preserve the peace between them and say if removing this, or reducing rather, this limb would help you coexist with this tree, we'll permit it, but that's why we especially need the permission of the tree owner, because they have to show that they're accepting the risk to their own tree.
And the fact that Mr. Barclay hired an expert arborist to prepare a report about cutting the tree, whether it's going to be detrimental to the tree or not, does that add another layer of assurance to the city that by cutting the limb, the tree potentially can be even healthier, apparently? Do we agree with that report?
No, I don't see any message in the report that says that a tree is healthier if the limb is removed. I essentially agree with the report that was provided. There's nothing really new in that information. Those are general observations that we also made on site. She's showing that, for instance, the tree does have some history of pruning even on that branch. It's not compartmentalizing those wounds as well. Those are what the pictures show. But all of those characteristics are generally typical, especially of older trees. And the report does not show significant hazard, for instance, which would then justify, for instance, the removal. So to me, that report essentially is what we observed as well as city staff. But I'm sorry, to answer your question, pruning or removing branches does not actually improve the health of trees. It might improve the structure and, for instance, reduce risk of failure, or if a part of a tree was diseased, of course, removing that diseased part of the tree could be beneficial. But in cases where you're just removing a limb that's not causing any other issue to the tree, then you're essentially still damaging the tree by creating the loss of wood, which is important as a storage mechanism for the tree, and also the canopy, which obviously makes food for the tree and energy. So that's why essentially removal will always be detrimental to a tree unless it's in one of those extreme cases.
Now, my question at this point, according to all the data, technically the city, we're supposed to stay out of this situation because it's between the two owners. Now, what in our commission, what can we do at this point? Can we waive the owner's consent? No, right?
I believe that's more of a legal question that I couldn't answer, so I would defer to Mr. Rodarte.
That's an excellent point, Mr. Stephen. In fact, situations like this occur all the time. And to me, I think this is more like a civil matter that should have been handled in the court, as opposed to bringing up to our attention. However, this is a little bit more complicated than just a regular tree, between two neighbors, because the city has an ordinance also regulating and protecting the tree. So it's even more complicated. Now, going back to Ms. Williams again, if I may, would it be prudent in a case like this, and has it been done in the past, or in similar situations, that when there is kind of like a split decision, we have an arborist report from Mr. Barclays, the applicant, that says it's perfectly fine to cut the tree. The owner of the tree does not present anything, except just that they're not agreeing to give permission, even though initially they were kind of in agreement. And the city is kind of caught in between, if that's correct, that we're not sure whether the tree is going to live or not, and we are a little concerned. Isn't that prudent at this time to ask an unbiased third party, of course at the expense of the applicant, an arborist, to prepare an unbiased report looking at this tree one more time and tell us whether that the tree can live or will not live after cutting? And then we'll put the decision based on that. One way or another, if they say, yes, go ahead and cut it, we'll issue the permit. If they say no, we will not issue the permit. Is that something like that that we can do? Like a peer review. I'm sure the building official is very familiar with cases like that, at least when it comes to the structural aspects, not necessarily trees. None of us, by the way, I'm not, and I don't think our board members are tree experts. That's where we're relying on expert opinions and reports to make a decision. And in cases like that, as I mentioned, when it comes to structures, for instance, that's what we do. We ask a peer reviewer at the discretion of the city. The city will decide who they want to send to get a report, an independent report about cutting this tree. Of course, there will be some expense which should be paid by the applicant. Is that something that we can do?
As far as I understand, that would be acceptable to the city. I know we've hired consultants in the past as independent arborists to provide a third opinion or a second opinion, as you said.
And the only reason I'm suggesting that, because the city staff, arborists, and director of the department, in fact, for that matter, are not comfortable with making that call that tree limb can be cut without damaging the tree. Is my understanding correct? Because in other words, I want to get another expert opinion if possible.
I think the nuance here would be that I don't think our position is that it would kill the tree or that it would endanger the tree to a significant degree, but simply the principle that a tree manager, who is the tree owner, must approve it as actions on their actual property. So again, that's where it's complex. We recognize a tree, even if it's on a neighboring property or spreads over a neighboring property, to be the actual property of the person who owns the land where the trunk is emanating from it. So again, it would be like if, for instance, a tree was pruned or trimmed or the roots were damaged and then that tree declined and died 5 or 10 years later, that's where you could potentially say that cumulative impact was a part of that final decline. So that's why it can still be very unpredictable, and I think that's why we ask for that approval of the tree owner.
Okay, fair enough. So what would be the city's liability, let's say, if we were to grant permission for cutting the tree and 5 years down the line the tree dies? Is the city liable?
Again, I think that would be a legal question.
Well, that's why I was suggesting maybe we should have a third-party opinion just to relieve the liability from the city, because I don't think we should get involved. Again, this is a case that should have been handled in the courts. What do you think, board members?
Well, my question is, technically, we're supposed to stay out of it, but have we tried to contact the owner of the tree?
Yeah, so I did speak to the owner. As Mr. Barkley mentioned, we had a site meeting. He didn't indicate to me his decision at that time, but he just wanted to know what the process was and what he was required to do and provide for the permit request to be approved. Then we discussed it. So he's certainly involved in the process, and I think that's why we would like them to continue to discuss this, and potentially, again, if they need to go to mediation or do some other kind of process before, again, resubmitting that application, that's what we're asking that they resolve before asking the city to issue the permit.
Because right now, that would be my first alternative at this point, because for us to rule that we can give the permit will put us in a predicament if anything happens. But if the owner is able to smooth it out now and okay with it, then it's all taken care of. That's why I'm just curious, have we tried to reach out to the owner again?
Well, so in my position, I can't lobby for the permit to be granted necessarily. I could only give the tree owner my opinion as the arborist technician and explain why we would approve this if it were requested. So he's aware that that would be a possible request that would be granted. I think it's just his choice, and I know he might have had his own arborist look at this tree as well.
So the
This
question
tree
then
in
is,
the backyard or front yard?
What was that?
Mr. Chairman?
Board member
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Hanes,
I can't hear a thing. Is he trying to, does he have a question?
Yeah, I'd like to know this tree you're talking about. Front yard or backyard?
Oh, it's in the front yard.
Front yard. Okay.
The front yard. Is there any safety hazard
I'm sorry?
with neighbors? Is there any safety hazard?
So far, none of the arborists, I believe, who've inspected this tree has found any safety hazard. Again, if, for instance, I had seen any major defects, I would certainly let the applicant know and the tree owner know. That would show an immediate risk of limb failure, for instance. And you can see in the report provided by Mary Beth McKenzie, the arborist, while she described typical defects or characteristics of older tree, she did not know any hazards that showed it was at risk of imminent failure.
But I
my
can't-
question is if kids play underneath, my understanding this is 5 feet above the ground. Is the kids going to damage? It's going to hit and hurt their head or arm or anything?
Is that a question for the applicant?
This is front yard, and then below, above the ground 5 feet, and then kids play underneath. This tree gonna hurt the kids or safe?
Well, the limb is about 10 feet in general off the ground, so it's relatively low. And again, we did not observe any cavities, decay, or other fungal activity, insects, necrotic bark, anything that would indicate that there was a failure point that was at risk of imminent failure.
But I heard above the ground
Excuse me, could I?
5 feet.
And
I heard above the ground 5 feet. That's correct?
It's about 5.5 feet at the lowest point. It's
Well,
about
now
a foot
it's
lower than
5
it was
feet.
a year.
Now, is that close
Okay.
to the property line where it's the little over 5 feet?
No, it starts to, at the, above the, 18 inches from the top of the fence, it begins to drop down. And it's, obviously, it's not a straight horizontal bench, it drops. At the lowest point, it's about, again, I measured it a couple days ago, it's about 5 to 8 inches. And then it goes up a little bit from there and curves off towards the street. But again, the lowest point is about 5, a little over 5.5 feet today.
Yeah.
Now, what I understood from the report, apparently the limb extends some 20 feet. However, your basically you were requesting to cut about half of it, some 10 feet, and then you hired an arborist report, and she mentioned it's probably better just to cut it off completely. So, asking you, Ms. Williams, what is your opinion one way or another about that? Cut half of it, cut the whole thing? As far as weight is concerned, and she mentioned something like that in the report, I think it makes sense. It's common sense. If the tree growing one side only, obviously it's heavier on that side. It does make sense to cut it off to make it more balanced. Is that the truth?
Well, that's a good question. And, you know, there is some truth to that where actually a tree will sometimes lower its limbs as the tree limb gets heavier and heavier with new growth. And one strategy for alleviating that is to do that light pruning at the end of the limb. So in this case, there is enough foliage here where you could say even some trimming of the branch at that 2 inches or under level that does not require a permit could potentially release that pressure and bring the limb back up to a certain height. So that is an option that they could explore to try to bring that limb up without having to actually reduce it back. Regarding how you trim such a long limb back, you know, our standard practice is that you always want to remove a limb back to what we call a lateral branch. So if you can imagine you have a long limb and then maybe a vertical branch coming up at a certain point, you're cutting it back to that, so you're creating a new terminal for that branch, and you have some leaves at the end and it can regrow at that size. In this case, like for this tree, there is no such lateral once you get past a certain point. As you can see from the photographs, it's really more that undulating limb, and therefore instead of making what we call a heading cut, where you would be just cutting back and leaving no leaves at that end point, we typically now say it's better just to reduce it back to the main trunk.
Well, that brings up another question. So let's say if a permit was issued for cutting the tree, will the city, you or the city arborist or city staff, will they be supervising? Will they be there while the tree is being cut, or it's completely up to the contractor what to do? Or do you? Or
Yeah.
can we ask for the city staff be present to make a call? What's the best thing to do?
So, you know, if you're doing that minor pruning and no permit is needed, there's no requirement, obviously, for city supervision or a licensed contractor. That it's completely up to the homeowner how they perform that light pruning that we have already described. Once you have a permit that's been granted, what we do is write out a set of conditions. And so we review the permit request and then describe the scope of work. For instance, all work must follow ISA standards, which is the International Society of Arboriculture, best management practices. We go through the style of pruning that we permit. And in that way, the contractor who's attached to the job is responsible for adhering to those conditions. And that would include, for instance, the location of the cut if it were a big branch like this one.
That sounds pretty reasonable to me. I don't know what other board members think about this.
I think our other commissioner was asking about the 5 feet, a little over 5 feet. Now, here's a question for Mr. Barclay. If you're walking around in the yard, will you be able to hit that tree limb?
Yes,
Walking around in the yard?
yeah.
Yes.
Can you hit your head on it?
Well, I'm 6'2", the limb is about 4 inches lower than that.
Okay, I didn't hear that. What was that?
The answer is yes.
Yes,
Yes, right? Okay.
just if I walk around in the tree, will I hit my head? Yes, unless I duck.
'Cause now, can we see
And I
that
have a
as
couple of
an,
times.
as an obstruction of personal property? That if the property owner can't walk clearly in their own yard without hitting a tree limb, is that something that we can work with?
That's a good question. That's certainly something we permit. For instance, if the tree limb limits ingress or egress, or there's some kind of other entrance or walkway that it's blocking. When we have larger properties generally, and that could explore other options like I said, lightening the load to see if the limb would come up. We don't necessarily jump to that I would say, justification under the ordinance to have it pruned without, again, that signature from the tree owner. So because we do have a condition in the ordinance that says limbs or trees rather with significant safety hazards or dead trees, et cetera, can be cut without a permit, that categorically includes all of those safety issues that we're talking about today.
Yeah, my concern is safety issue. 5 foot above the ground, my concern is safety. The rest, even like front yard, if backyard, I don't mind. But front yard for the safety issue.
Well, clearly this tree is going to grow bigger and taller, and eventually probably is going to hanging down even more because of the weight. So if not today, maybe 5 years from now will be a safety issue. Yes, no, maybe?
You know, I think we generally interpret safety issues as being relevant to like a target. That's how we look at tree risk assessment and management. So when you have a target like a house or a playground or a car or driveway, you know, we look at those as what we're trying to protect from the tree. When you have a space where people walk around or just utilize, like for recreation, that's when we look at, well, how often are there people here? Those are the moving targets. So in that way, this tree limb represents very little risk comparatively to other risk assessment situations, because it's also very low to the ground. So I understand the point that someone could hit their head on it, but again, it's in the corner of the yard, so it just doesn't fulfill the requirements under the ordinance for how we would interpret it as a risk or as a hazard.
Could we make a comment? This is Peggy. Could we make a comment?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Does the applicant have a question or they want to say something? I'm sure.
Can you hear me? This is Peggy Barclay. I was wondering if we could comment about the hazard issue. Are you able to hear me?
Oh,
Yes.
yeah, we
Can
were
you hear
just.
me?
Yeah, we were just discussing that issue, whether it's going to be hazardous, whether it's a safety issue, and city staff commented on that.
I would like to add a comment to that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Please.
There is not regular traffic underneath that tree right now because the area is essentially unusable. It is designated as a badminton court. And if we were to, in fact, use it as a badminton court, which our grandkids really want to do, it's very much of a hazard because they simply can't use that half of the court effectively. In addition to it being an obstruction of not being able to hit the ball with a racket, they are in danger of hitting their heads too. So the hazard isn't mitigated. I don't it not being in a walkway because it is an area that people do walk under in the use of it as its intended purpose being a sport court.
And it used to get a lot more use prior to COVID quarantine. But the kids, since COVID, they can't use it anymore because of the growth above that.
Well, and they've gotten taller.
Yes.
Shorter it was.
Yeah, they don't hit their head, but
It wasn't as bad as it should now.
the racket will hit the branch.
Understood. Thank you. Are there any other questions, concerns from the board members?
My other question is your first few pictures in Exhibit 1 part shows the driveway. Now, is that overhanging on the driveway? Because on the other pictures, it doesn't show.
What's the neighbor's driveway?
Onto the neighbor's driveway.
It grows from the neighbor's driveway towards their property. pretty
Oh,
much.
okay, so your property, on that picture, your property is
It's
on
to
the right side?
Yes. it's to the
Ah,
right.
okay.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, maybe we can get the address and physically we can check it. Hello, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Maybe better we get the address, then we can go and look physically about the tree. Then on the phone or on the map or whatever is not clear to us, but maybe much better physically check the tree. This is my recommendation.
I'm sorry, are you asking the board members to do what?
To go look at the tree.
To
If
go
board
physically
members
look at
can go,
it?
like for example, I can go and look at it.
Well, the
Make
fact,
sure it's
Mr. Ernestian, with all due respect, the fact of the matter is that none of our board members, not myself, and I don't think any of the board members are arborists or the experts in this matter. So I don't know if just by looking at it, we can make an assessment. It's pretty obvious the tree is hanging down. It's close to 6 feet from the ground. And I can't say it's a potential hazard. It's not. Apparently, the arborists have said it's not. It's pretty healthy. And the only problem is that the neighbor has a right of enjoyment to his property. And obviously, this has been a nuisance for all these years. And the owner of the property doesn't want to give permission.
mine is only the safety-wise, only, not other arborists or nothing. We don't know about the tree, but just the safety. If possible.
And I can also address that by saying, Trees change, of course, over time, and certainly this tree could develop cavities or other risk factors that we would consider then appropriate under the ordinance for removal. So that's certainly something that could happen in the future, in which case we would accept another request, a review, and potentially if, for instance, I'm not able to identify the risk myself, that's when we would ask the applicant to provide a risk assessment by another arborist. And once we were able to approve that, then we would be able to say that that was a hazard and it could be removed. So that is a step that could be taken in the future. We just don't observe those issues right now to make that appropriate.
I see.
Because right now, what I see is technically, there's nothing our commission can really propose at this point because we don't have any legal grounds. Am I standing correct?
Yes, the property owner obviously has a right to the enjoyment to his game court, which happens to be in the front yard. And this tree is kind of overhanging over that game court, and it's hanging down within 6 feet of the game court, and I totally get it. At the same time, we have a property owner who doesn't want to give any permission to cutting the tree, even though the tree is completely growing towards the neighbor's property. In a perfect world, I think a property owner should have a right to cut the tree branches, foliage, whatever, if it's hanging over their property. That's written in any codes. But in a case like this, because we, again, as I said, because we have an ordinance that's protecting the tree, makes the matter more complicated. It's not just what the property owner wants or what the neighbor wants. We are concerned about the health of the tree itself. And that's why I want to get a clear verbiage from the city staff that if we cut this tree, we're confident it's going to live. And if we cannot come up to that assessment today, as I pointed out before, maybe we should get a third opinion, an expert opinion, if this is going to cause any damage to the tree long term.
I agree.
With that said, would we be able to recommend allowing the permit to go through, if that was the case? Is that something we have the privy to do, or is it, we don't have that?
Excuse me. This is Dan Harger, Assistant Director of Public Works. If I can help answer that question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Yeah, this body is basically the final Board of Appeals for the final decision maker relative to the ordinance decisions for the indigenous tree ordinance. So whatever your recommendation is, the city staff has denied the approval of the permit. But if this board feels that you can make a decision to override the staff's decision, or you can make a decision to uphold the staff's decision to either not allow the permit or to allow the permit and have the limb removed. That is in your authority per the ordinance. If we're looking at maybe involving another third party arborist beyond this board, I would recommend that it be referred to the legal department for interpretation of the ordinance.
I'm sorry, what was the last thing you recommend? What?
I would recommend if the board does not select one of the motions in the recommendation, if the board were to select hiring a third party arborist, that determination that motion be reviewed, referred to the legal department for review.
Okay.
At this point, if according to the ordinance and according to the proceedings, you would have to render a decision within 15 days of this hearing. So you have the option of doing a motion to uphold, to deny, or any other motion that you see fit so that you can go ahead and, let's say, obtain additional information or legal opinion or what have you on the questions that you have raised already. Public Works staff will be directed to provide or submit that to legal or what have you for that interpretation if that's what you choose to do. And aside from any sort of legal questions that you are entertaining right now, that once again would be up to the city attorney's office to interpret, to see if the board has that power to make those or render those particular decisions. You do have the power to do the motions, but I think some of your concerns that you've expressed during this session has been, do we have the power, what's the liability that's being held right now? So if those are your concerns, you can address staff or make a motion for that, and that's at your discretion.
So my direct question then first would be, is the city confident that the tree should be able to survive with the cut?
That's what I'm looking for.
Well, again, it's something that we would permit under the ordinance. And I go into greater detail of that in the report, where we don't see it as necessarily a required cut to mitigate risk or issues, but we're comfortable with permitting that. But again, I agree with the fact that we avoid liability by asking the tree owner to approve it. So that's essentially why our position is to request that.
Now then my question to Mr. Barclay, are you definite that the owner will not change their mind?
Anything can happen, but again, this process has been going on for a year. My last communication with him, I sent him a copy of the arborist report, indicated that we were still trying to secure a permit on our own absent his approval. Again, I said we regret having to cut, but it limits, it hinders our ability to utilize that property. And then I attached a copy of the arborist report and told him, in as much as it involves an assessment of a limb on his tree, there was information in there that he should be aware of, and he can accept it or whatever. But I never got a response to that, but I don't know. Let's just say I'm not optimistic that he's going to change his mind. He was pretty adamant.
Now, did he point out any concerns about the survival of the tree?
Not that I'm aware of. I know his arborist looked at the limb. At one point when he was there, I asked him of the arborist about the cut, his arborist, and I showed him where we thought it should be cut, and he thought that was appropriate if the limb was going to be cut. He didn't opine anything to me about the impact on the tree's health, and what he may have said to our neighbor, I have no idea.
Is there any way we can ask for that, since the neighbor had an arborist probably out there, is there any way we can ask for their report? Because if we can get a copy, if their arborist already said that it's okay, it's just up to the owner, then, we're looking pretty good on that, since then we'll have 3 arborists that looked at it and are okay with it.
I will not be comfortable with an arborist report from the owner of the tree. If anything, as I mentioned before, it should be a third party, and it should be chosen by the city staff, who they pick as an arborist of the peer reviewers to do an independent and unbiased assessment of the tree. it will not be prudent to go back to the owner. We know what the answer will be.
But according to Mr. Barclay, it would have been okay, right? Am I correct?
Was he really okay with cutting the tree? Do you know that, Mr. Barkley?
Initially,
No, not the owner, the owner's arborist.
oh, Tony? He,
Just Tony, okay.
he did not say those words, I'm okay with cutting it. I asked him, I told him that's what we were thinking about, that the cut should be, that was appropriate. And he looked at it and said, yes, that's where it should be cut because there's some growth right at that juncture on the branch and that would help fill in over time. Again, he talked in terms of pruning it, not that he was necessarily going to do it, but we discussed how it would be pruned. He never expressed a view about the impact on the tree, to me.
And that was during a conversation where the neighbor had said, yeah, I'm not, not crazy about having you cut it, but go ahead. And he'd had his arborist there working on some other trees and asked him to take a look at this one. So we had a conversation with him as well.
Okay. Any further discussions, any further questions?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I agree your recommendation, third party and city staff choose the arborist. I agree your recommendation.
I'm okay with that recommendation, but do we need to go that far if our own arborist, is willing
Right.
to go to bat and says, it should be okay,
Absolutely.
then, my inclination would be to make the motion to allow the permit to go through.
Yes, we don't wish to extend this case any further, so if you could come up with a motion to that respect, conditional, and the city staff, I hope they can follow it through with our recommendations. And it needs to be spelled out, of course, or should it come back to us again for final decision?
I think in review, this is kind of a very unusual case, and in safety to make sure that, you are making the appropriate decision, that, you give staff enough time to prepare for that and to allow, that option to discuss with legal to see if that's even a viable option. And then allow the item to come back at the next scheduled meeting, if they're able to meet with legal at that particular time.
One last question from city staff. I'm so sorry, because we're just trying to understand. Again, we're not attorneys, we're not we're not arborists, we don't have expertise in this field. We're just asking questions. How about, or has there been a case like this in the past that, let's say, we grant permission to a neighbor to cut a tree, and later the tree dies? Is there a way, or that's the extreme, of course. Is there a way to make the applicant liable for all the responsibilities later on and basically indemnify the city of any kind of liability later on?
Again, this is Dan Hargrove, Assistant Director of Public Works. I think that in the case you're asking a legal opinion, and while Catherine is an expert in arboriculture and in the details of this case, I think if in terms of liability and risk, that would be something that would need to be referred to the legal department.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Is it possible to get anybody from the legal department here now to ask?
Can they comment on this?
It would be submitted, it would be required of Public Works to submit with them and consult with them regarding to bring back their opinion to you. So if that's your said wish to have staff directed to do so, you may do so.
Can we have a recess for 10 minutes, please?
Mr. Chairman?
To confer?
No, just have a recess. I mean, we've done that in the past during boardroom, for a case, we do recess and the board members meet and then they discuss the case and then they come back. Is it possible? Can we do this?
I think the conferring needs to happen because it's a public forum that it needs to occur.
I see.
Yeah, and that would be for legal.
Now, are we still bound by the 15
Mr.
days,
Chairman?
or-
Mr. Chairman?
Are we still bound by the 15 days?
If you it would be at the discretion of allowing, Mr. Barkley has been exceptionally
Patient.
generous with the scheduling of this, so it would be obviously with the permission of him to seek additional, or else a decision would have to be rendered today.
We have no problem taking the time you need.
Perfect.
Okay,
Well, since we don't have any legal counsel here to answer some of our questions, Mr. Barkley, will you take responsibility for this tree if you cut it and something happens to it later on?
You want me to issue an insurance policy covering anything that happens to that tree for the rest of its life? No.
Thank you.
so should we table this till next month? And then,
That's something I was trying to avoid.
same here, but then we don't have our legal,
Counsel, yeah.
that's our key right now is, what can we do?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes. We can't hear you.
You can hear me now? Hello? You can
Yes,
hear me?
yes, we can hear you.
Okay. When I bought my house 20 years ago, and then my neighbor, both neighbors, has a big tree.
I didn't get it, I'm sorry.
Mr. Hanessian? Mr. Hanessian?
It's breaking up.
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
You can hear me now?
Yes.
Well, then I'm going to repeat again. 25 years ago, when I bought my house, both neighbors, they have a huge oak tree. And then I noticed they cut the big branch, huge, like 8 to 10 inches each one. And then I don't know how they did it. I don't know. Just on the property line. And I'm very happy for that.
Okay, so what are we saying?
So,
Are the board members in a position to make a motion at this point?
well, I'm willing to make the motion to approve the permit based according to our own arborist stating that should be okay. I'm willing to do that.
Okay, why don't you make the motion and let's see if there's a second.
Okay, so I will make the motion to approve the permit based according to information from the city arborist that that the tree should be okay with making the cut.
Is there a second, Mr. Harnessian?
Yes, a second.
Roll
Okay.
call. Roll call. Chair Kashishian.
Yes.
Board Member Lee.
Yes.
Board Member Hanessian.
Yes.
So do we need to spell out what the motion is, or is clear?
The motion is clear, and I'll define it in the minutes.
Beautiful, thank you. Thank you.
Unless Public Works has anything that they're uncertain of.
If Mr. Hardgrove is still in the meeting, I would defer to him for any comments on that.
No, hello, this is Dan Hargrove, Assistant Director of Public Works. No, I have no concerns or questions on that.
Item 8.
Yes.
Item 8, reports, information only. Item 8A, recent building activity report and monthly income summaries. Simply for your review.
Okay.
Item 9.
So the report is only for information, or somebody's going to make a presentation on the report?
No, the report is just
Information
a
only.
summary report for you.
Thank you. Okay, item 9, please. Adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Roll call. Chair Kashishian.
Yes.
Board Member Lee.
Yes.
Board Member Hanessian.
Yes.
Meeting adjourned.
Excuse me, this is Mike Barkley. I just wanted to take a second and thank city staff who have been incredibly patient and helpful throughout this. Ms. Williams, Mr. Rodarte, Mr. Locke, everybody has been incredibly helpful, and we appreciate them, the work they did. I know this is, this took a whole lot more time and effort on a lot of people's parts than really I think should have. But we appreciate the board's consideration of this and the city staff's work as well. Thank you.
And we thank you and appreciate your patience also. Thank you.
Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.